embarked on a scheme called Be a Brick, Buy a Block. And we cast this scheme with the images of the French Revolution. And we sold the same blocks, but for different prices. So one was £10 for peasants. That was red, and it had a little bonnet, revolutionary bonnet on it. Then £100 for bourgeoisie, and that had a tricorne. And then the third one with a crown was £1,000 for aristocrats. But in order to sell these blocks, we needed to find a constituency. So I approached one of the biggest developers in the city, who was well known and fancied himself somewhat as an arts lover. And of course, he was called Stuart Lipton. And he had a big address book. So I enlisted his help, and I said, will you open your address book to us? And so he then said he would. And so I contacted architects, builders, all the people, basically, who wanted to get a contract from Stuart Lipton. And we then sold these blocks to these people. And a combination of peasants, bourgeoisie and aristocrats netted £8,000. Not a huge amount of money, but it was such a laugh doing this scheme. And it gave people something to talk about. It raised morale. It was funny. You felt you were doing something in a difficult situation. So it had benefits beyond just the money. But actually, as a format for things, it's quite good, because rich people like to know that poorer people are also contributing. So you're kind of creating a community with the scheme itself. So I've talked about commercial sponsorship and individual giving. And now I'm going to talk about how we embarked on a civic dialogue, really. In the mid-80s, Margaret Thatcher and the Tory party abolished London local government, an incredibly undemocratic act. The local government wasn't completely perfect, but actually it did mend the roads. It did provide a unified approach to education. It did provide all kinds of things. And by the early 90s, the city was really falling apart. I mean, it was quite, the fabric of the city was very, very problematic. And even businesses were beginning to notice that people were more reluctant to work, come and work in London. It was a very bad time. So, and the civic networks were disintegrating. So there wasn't a unified public licensing, for performances. We had to go to individual public licensing people. There was fragmentation of the education field. So if we wanted to attract schools, we couldn't just go to one spot. We had to communicate with every single school. Morale was low in the arts community because there seemed to be no sense of strategic plan, no sense of care, no interest. And it was a very xenophobic time as well. And we felt there was a real need to build new allies and a new dialogue with other people in the city, simply to get the festival on the road. And so we decided to set out on a search for new forms of support through simply engaging with people in different walks of life. And the other motivation, very important, was that we were bored with complaining. So we thought we'd turn the situation on its head and say, actually, instead of thinking we're a little organisation who can't do anything, let's pretend we're a big organisation and we can offer something in this predicament. So we moved from a sense of what do we need, what are we missing, what do we want, what's wrong. we moved to a situation of what do we have to offer in this civic predicament? And how do we take a lead without formal authority? Because nobody came to us and said, oh, Lift, you've got to do something about this. But we just decided that we were in a position, we had the capacity and the motivation to do something. The question was, what? And so taking a helicopter view, we felt that we had the possibility of bringing people together across levels of power, because through our fundraising, earlier fundraising, we'd actually sought them out. We had personal connections with them through that process. Also, we were in contact with lots and lots of different people having put different productions on. And we felt that we could bring people together in a spirit of celebration, to learn more about their city. And so our idea was to raise morale in the capital by seeking out exceptional projects that in this situation were doing something amazing. So we devised a programme called Lifting London, which was a conference and a dimension of the artistic programme. So some of the productions that we commissioned in the programme were related specifically to London, celebrating different aspects of London. The conference brought together success stories from social housing, where a really original approach had been taken to a very run-down estate. They'd installed a recording studio for young people rather than paying attention to individual apartments or renovation in a more routine way. Education, I won't go into huge detail. Culture was a show that had been incubated in one place, gone to another, gone to the West End, gone to Broadway, because it had very, very good local roots. And in the business world, it was a story that had taken a longer-term view of risk than the 3 years that is usual within corporate investment and investment companies. So in fact, that business was acting more like a cultural producer and had come up with some winning ideas. So we brought together and this is important, we brought together the people who had been responsible for making those happen. Not the commentators, not academics, the actual people whose stories these were. And then we invited the policymakers to come and say, why didn't more of this happen? Because if London was going to survive, more of it had to happen. So in the room, we were getting practitioners and policymakers together to celebrate what was happening in the city and to imagine how more of it could happen.